I must have given him some note about the scene, about Scrooge and the scene and the moment, and he said, "Oh, that's an acting thing." And of course, what he meant was, "Leave me alone. I don't need you for that. I don't need you to help me with the acting thing. I've got the acting thing."
Hi, Donica, how are you?
Hello, Russell. I'm okay. Live from my bedroom in Hornsey.
Okay, cool. So you're going to talk to us today about direction, but we'll get into that in a moment. First of all, tell us all about you. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Donica, and I am a freelance theatre director. I would say I'm also an acting teacher and a dramaturg. So I guess the bulk of my time, my work life is spent working on new plays on the whole, either as the director of a production or as part of the development process of a play, working with the writer, either because I'm going to direct it or because I'm not in other contexts. And then I also, and as part of that, I work with playwrights. So I work on a few MAs. I do a bit of mentoring, and then on the other side of things, I work with actors a lot. It's always, for about a decade now, it's been a big part of my year working with acting students. And I love doing that, and I've learned a huge amount through that. And it's also given me, as a lot of directors find, it's given me a space to develop my own process and trial things and develop methodologies. So yeah, I guess there's these kind of three parts in a way. There's the director who's kind of making work, and then there's the kind of the collaborator with writers and the collaborator with actors, both in both training and professional contexts. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, many hats, I think.
Yeah, I like the multi-hat thing. I think on a kind of a pragmatic level, diversification is key, to survival in the arts, to kind of long-term survival. I mean, to have a 50-year kind of career, I think you need to be ready, able, and interested in doing a number of different things. And obviously, the idea would be to only do the things you're interested in. But in order to narrow that down, you need to do more things. So there are other things that I used to do quite a lot of producing, mostly for my own work, and I stopped doing that at a certain point because I decided I didn't enjoy it very much. I didn't like doing it very much, even though I had lots of the skills. And that can be tricky in our business because we have a lot of transferable skills often, which are valuable one way or another, and marketable and saleable, and we all have kind of bank managers to satisfy, metaphorically speaking. And but actually, yeah, for me, it's very what I've obviously tried to do over that time is try to narrow it down to the stuff I get the most out of,
Yeah.
balanced with the stuff that pays the most. So, and trying to find that healthy balance. I also sometimes I do a little bit of work sometimes with younger students, but that tends to be kind of more specialized, and for people who have more money. Um,
Yeah.
um,
Okay, cool. So I've interviewed, I think, 33, 34 people on the channel so far, and I've never actually had a director on, which I find very intriguing because I guess most of my portfolio is based on wearing the director's hat. So I found that interesting. So, and also wanted to remedy that. So, which is why you're on the channel today. So your first question is, what actually is direction?
what is direction? What is direction? So I guess, yeah, things that appeal to me as an answer to that for myself. An image from Declan Donnellan, so to quote other people, but him saying that, I guess, kind of foundation ideas for me, saying that a director is somebody who watches some people, let's say a couple of people, a couple of actors, watches them doing something, watches them working on a scene, and feels deeply inside of themselves compelled to help them be better. That there's something kind of fundamentally, in some way that it's impossible for that person to not say, why don't you try this? Or if you thought about it like that, maybe that would help. And just a compulsion to help actors get from where they are to something brilliant. I guess that's one thing which I think I share with that quote. So I think that's how I began in drama school. I started training as an actor, and I kind of discovered an inclination to direct from there. So I was watching a lot of actors acting around me, and I think I learned an awful lot through watching them struggle. And I then went on to do an MA as well, where I spent a lot of my time in the acting classes. And again, I spent a lot of time watching how the teachers, the directors worked with the acting students, and I feel like I had a lot of insight into how to enable and how to debilitate an actor. And I also have that experience from myself, obviously, as someone who has both experienced enabling and debilitating people. And hopefully, you notice when you're doing one or the other, or at least in hindsight, you can look back and go, oh, hold on a second, I really didn't help that person there, and I got in the way. Or so there's that on a simple level. And then I was in an immediate what got me into it, I suppose, watching actors thinking I can make this better, I can somehow lift this. But then also dramaturgy was very, very early on for me. Dramaturgy and storytelling was central. So I did some devising in drama school. We did some devising as a group of actors, a group of acting students. And so very, very early on for me, taking material and bringing it with other material and multi-textual sources, and taking kind of poetic text or journalistic text and making that theatrical. It was something that it's not something I've gone to do a huge amount, but right there at the beginning, there was an interest in creating story and using juxtaposition and montage and putting ideas next to each other, and layering, texturing ideas and narrative. That from very early on, that was present for me as well. So I think that's something also that for me is there in a director, an interest in not only telling a story but how it's told. I think in a way for me, perhaps a playwright probably needs to be a little bit more concerned with telling the story than how it's told, and the director probably needs to be a bit more concerned with how it's told, of the two things. But of course, obviously they all have to work in harmony. But and then so yeah, actors, dramaturgy, and then for me also language. And this is kind of quite personal for me, but language. It was many years, probably well into my 20s, before I realized that as a teenager, I had a passion for language, and I never recognized it because I was quite a poor student. I wasn't very good at school. I didn't enjoy it at all. I was very unmotivated, and English didn't speak to me as a subject. But actually, so it took me a long time to realize that even during that period where all of that stuff was true, there was a passion for language, actually, which I kind of was able to, in hindsight, kind of see. And I guess the first things I ever directed were Shakespeare and some Beckett, and I was immediately drawn as a director to stuff with complex poetic language, which in which the writer was using language, with a certain density, and a vividness, a precision. For some reason, which was probably a decade later, I was able to go back and think, well, why was I drawn? Why was this kid who was crap at English? Why was he directing Shakespeare in his first productions? Coming up on 20 years ago this summer, actually. And I think language, I think, is for me, so a passion for language. So yeah, for me, story and how you tell it, how you engage an audience, how you move them, where you take them, is something a director does. Collaborating with, enabling the people around you, the actors, the writer. Beyond that, of course, obviously there's other people we could talk much more about, but at least in those very first simple sense, the person who's written, the person whose story it is, who's trying to tell that story, and the actors that are going to manifest that, working with those collaborators and everyone else, depending on the show you're making, enabling and fostering that atmosphere. I think the director as the kind of leader, I suppose, And most of the work I've done, I have been in that role, and I've done other projects where it's been much more collaborative, and we've kind of taken turns as leader. So I've made work with writers where we've developed quite a good understanding of who's leading at each moment. But it's still a leadership role in the sense that sometimes, if not all the time, you need to be taking that. And actually probably never all the time. Actually, that's probably a trick you can fall into, but or that I've fallen into. But so understanding how to managing a room, managing the energies of a company, managing the creativity and the overall kind of direction of travel, managing the ambitions, I think, because the ambitions and the direction of travel are kind of quite closely aligned. You need the room to want the things that that you think you can achieve.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There's a real thin line to direction and directing and director, but everything you've said has just chimed with me, and I'm nodding internally a lot because the things you're saying are like, yep. And it's nice to hear them. And what I got from that was that you're kind of saying that direction is enabling something, someone, somebody, and also interpretation came into my mind, that maybe that was one of the key factors in what is direction. And then there's, like you say, there's lots of other layers underneath that and surrounding that. But yeah, it's intriguing. So would you say that a director is always needed? Controversial question.
Well, certainly on the productions I work on, director is obviously fundamental, but no, of course not. Of course not. I mean, directors are a new idea. We've only been around about 120 years or something like that. We're a new idea. I think directors can be very useful, and directors can be the opposite of that. What is the opposite? Not useless, but in the way, I suppose, I think, as well. And it's interesting, I guess, over the years, wrestling with sometimes getting a feeling from a collaborator that they just don't want you there, or they don't want you in that moment, or they don't want to collaborate with you. I had an early experience when I was about 20. I'd been directing I'd already been directing a little bit. I'd finished drama school, and I'd done my first couple of shows. And I was associate director on a show at the Gate in Dublin, their big Christmas show, Christmas Carol. And Barry McGovern, a kind of famous Beckett actor, was taking over the role of Scrooge in this Christmas show. And he's a very nice man and a very good actor, and was going to be great in the role. And I was running the second of 2 weeks of rehearsals. So I was the director, had gone off to do a panto, and I was there in charge. Very young man, anyway, and some good anecdotes from that project, inevitably. But this one moment with Barry where he was working through a scene, and he's quite a technical actor, and he had to kick his shoes off or whatever. And I said I must have given him some note about the scene, about Scrooge and the scene and the moment. And he said, "Oh, that's an acting thing." And of course, what he meant was, leave me alone. I don't need you for that. I don't need you to help me with the acting thing. I've got the acting thing. I need you to help me know that I'm throwing my shoes into the right place, and and I'm putting my thing down in the right place, and I know who I'm saying this line to. What he wanted from me was the technical things. He didn't want me to help him with the acting. And in a way, also, of course, what he was saying was he didn't want me to judge his acting. In the process he was taking himself through was something which was not appropriate for me to build acting notes on, which is something I wasn't necessarily able to hear as a 20-year-old. I kind of heard it as, go away, I don't want your notes. I mean, very politely, but kind of leave my acting space alone, which it was. But it was also, I'm not bringing my final product. I'm kind of working through this technically, and I need you to be with me working through it technically.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was an interesting example, because I've got in that scenario, in a sense, what he was saying was, I don't need you at all, because the stage manager could have done what he needed me to do, and probably would have done it better. So that was an interesting kind of insight into whether you are necessary or not in certain moments where you think you are, where you want to be. I mean, I wanted to be really necessary. I wanted to be important and vital and useful. But actually, for some of them, I wasn't any of those things. And
Mhm.
and that's valid. That was valid. That was there. That was the reality for them. And I don't think it was just because I was, a child. I think it was also partly because of what they needed and what they didn't, and what was their space. It's that image from Dirty Dancing of my dancing space and your dancing space. And I think perhaps as maybe the part of the insight I got as an assistant director or associate director on that show was that actors were much more comfortable with telling me this is my space and that's your space. Whereas when you're the director, it takes a lot more for an actor to tell you that this is my space, that's your space. It takes a lot more, and for all of us, we'll probably have memories of that being of if that happens, it being a moment of conflict. We probably don't have many experiences of where that happens and it's totally cool, and it's like, okay, yeah, great, that's your space, it's my space, and we'll work together and happily around that, because there's a lot of I often describe the role of director as in relation to the suspension of disbelief, that the director's role is based on a suspension of disbelief in the room, that all the actors agree to suspend their disbelief in the director's ability. They suspend their disbelief in the director's ability to not understand the play, to lead them, to be a good person, to be a good leader, to be a good manager, to be wise, to be fair, to be reasonable. They suspend that. They agree without language, without contract, to believe in you, to have faith in you, and each other. And in some ways, it's a very odd, unwritten contract, which I think has some downsides, including, for example, like that, it doesn't necessarily provide the actor with the right to come up to the director and say, this is my space and that's your space, because you're not supposed to need that, because the director is supposed to be glorious and all-knowing. So why would you need that if the suspension of disbelief is present? So it has big problems as a kind of as an internal management fiction. It has big problems, but it's also very useful, and it helps us work very fast to quick deadlines. When we're trying to build an entire world in 3 or 4 weeks, there is a pragmatism to that suspension of disbelief, which can help everybody. However, of course, the problem is if there is something fundamentally wrong in that fiction, if the director really isn't at all a nice person in that period of time for whatever reason, or if they really aren't capable of doing X, Y, and Z in that particular time, then you end up in a company which has huge schisms in it, and which in that instance would probably be far better off without a director, because it can work.
Yeah.
It can work without a director, and that's, I guess, an example of an instance where the wrong person in the leadership role, and this goes for the whole world, and at every level, from the level of parenting to the level of presidents, the wrong person in the leadership role causes mayhem, and no leadership can cause mayhem, but often they're kind of similar, the level of mayhem, and you kind of think, well, actually, let's just take out the leadership figure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really nice to actually take the lid off the role of director, because I think sometimes there are lots of mysteries based around it, and we could almost spend an hour just on one question here, but that's really, really helpful actually, that you've pulled down a few sheets and we can look behind it, in that the directors aren't necessarily always needed, which is nice. So the last question, and I'm talking about you specifically here, how has the role of director shifted for you, let's say, for the past 2 decades?
All right, so it's okay for me to say 2 decades, Russell. I'm not sure if it's okay for you to
Sorry,
say.
the last 5 years.
Okay, I obviously I look much younger than I am. How has it changed for me? I think probably the biggest journey for me has been from very young, from unlearned and unconventional, where I was making work based on a small number of really big influences. So when I began directing, I was hugely influenced by Peter Brook, which I guess places me very squarely in quite a large generation of directors. But I was influenced hugely by him, by his work. I was influenced a lot by Samuel Beckett's aesthetics, his kind of formal innovations, again, which places me again kind of in a generation. quite a broad generation. So those two are kind of obvious in a way, but very important for me in terms of how I developed my work and how I thought about directing. And then kind of little things like I kind of in my training I touched off someone called Tadeusz Kantor. It's a Polish theater maker, designer, very avant-garde theater maker, and I just picked up little ideas about his work, little things he'd said, little essays. And this isn't stuff I was going off and researching on my own, as I wasn't never a very diligent student. Stuff I was picking up in drama school, his kind of ideas, and I guess probably little things from Brecht, and little bits and pieces from Commedia dell'arte and improvisation. And I think, you kind of have a bit of a hodgepodge early on, this kind of this process and this practice, which is made up of kind of just the random stuff you've touched on. And then I think I went through a process which probably a lot of directors go through, really, particularly in this country, in our culture. Well, anyway, it's particular to our culture in this country because it is what it is, and maybe a similar thing may happen elsewhere. But which is that I was taught through my assisting that you had to be far more conventional than that in how you approach things, and so now that's reductive, of course, but it's not inaccurate either. So I assisted at the RSC for a long time, did about 10 productions there, including Michael Boyd's history cycle. I worked on all 8 of those histories, which is a 2.5-year project, which was the same amount of time I spent in drama school, and longer than most of my relationships. And obviously I learned a huge amount from Michael, some of which was brilliant and very unconventional, and very much about him and a certain radicalism within his practice, which there is. But then a lot of it was conventional working practice. I went from being a director who did a lot of exercises, a lot of kind of workshopping type strategies, to a director who didn't do any of that at all, and just worked on the text, worked on the scenes, got stuff up on its feet. Still, I had a lot of things in common with Michael, which survived that, including kind of being very mobile about staging. So staging would be quite mobile for me till quite late in the day, and that probably, in fact, Michael was probably much more that. So I've gone much more that direction through the work with him, a direction I feel like I was already going in, but certainly was helped by him to be somebody who I think has a really good sense of when the right moment is to fix things, and that's often quite late, and that when you fix things early, you can be, you can fix all kinds of things you haven't intended to fix by fixing staging. It can fix all kinds of other things, and it can be very, very hard to unpick. And it presumes that in some way you've understood everything. And I absolutely think that's not the case, and that you definitely haven't understood everything in the first week of rehearsals, in the second week of rehearsals, and in some way that if you think you have, then you're already in trouble, and you've stopped looking, which is fundamentally our role. I was talking about naivety with somebody this morning, actually, about an R&D project and how important naivety is, and the image of naivety is to be wide-eyed, and the necessity to see is fundamental to the director's job. And as soon as you stop seeing, you're in trouble. As soon as you stop hearing, you're in trouble, and because all kinds of things. I guess I often, sorry, I'm tangenting for a moment, but I'll just finish this little tangent. I often say to companies very early on that we have to be good enough to follow this journey we're going on all the way through to the 3rd to the 4th week of rehearsals, realize we've got something fundamentally wrong, and change everything and still be ready for opening night. We have to be good enough for that, and we are good enough for that. It's something I often say in the first couple of days, and it's something I genuinely believe, and that comes from Michael. But anyway, I could talk a lot about him because he's very influential for me. But there was something about the conventionality of working at the RSC, right. The sense of establishment, the sense of working process, proper actors, people who've been working for a long time, accepted ways of doing things. And I came out of that process. I guess it was the second time I came out of an assisting process quite changed, and not necessarily for the better, but it's part of the process of growing and developing. I mean, many things were for the better, but it took me another probably 5 years beyond that to come out of that much more conventional phase and back into understanding myself as a director in many ways more similar to when I began, but obviously far more developed than that, and hopefully far more sophisticated understanding of the job and far better at it. I hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of been my journey. A kind of a kind of a strange curve of experimentation and formal innovation, followed by a certain process of conventionality to some extent, and then coming out of that. I mean, even the conventionality obviously wasn't terribly conventional. I mean, I wasn't going off directing Alan Ayckbourn in mid-scale venues or anything, but there was a conventionality of process. I think that's what I'm saying: process and methodology, not necessarily aesthetic, actually. Because during that period, I made a production of The Early Bird, which was two actors in a solid perspex box, with mics and pitch shifting and all kinds of experimental aesthetics, but the methodologies were fairly conventional, and that's become less and less the case. And as my methodologies have become less conventional, I've become much more useful to writers and theatre makers, for example, because now I have a far bigger range of how I work. And I'm far more concerned with the needs of the project than I am about my process looking like the kind of process that actor B, who's done lots of stage, would be happy to be in. I'm not quite so concerned about that. So, does that give you some kind of
definitely. Yeah. No, I think what I got from that, if anybody's watching this and they're looking to go into direction, I think there's almost you need to have almost like a dexterous nature, and then also at some point be able to cherry pick, have an instinct to cherry pick certain things that work for you personally as an artist that are then going to enable you, your career, you in the room, etc. But it's fascinating. It's a very complex job, and I'm really glad to have you on because I don't think the role of director is unpacked enough, but I think we've done a little bit today.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. No, it's been good. Good to think about it.
Thank you so much, Danica. All right, take care.
All right, cheerio.